To get people excited about Boost Mobile's new nationwide 5G network, we're offering unlimited talk, text, and data for $25 a month.
Forever.
Even if you have a baby.
Even if your baby has a baby.
Even if you grow old and wrinkly and you start repeating yourself.
Even if you start repeating yourself.
Even if you're on your deathbed and you need to make one last call.
Or text.
Right, or text. The long-lost son you abandoned at birth.
You'll still get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile.
Forever!
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Forever.
Hey, true crime fans. Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Hey there. Looking to level up your shopping experience? Let me introduce you to Amazon Live. If you haven't heard, it's a shoppable video experience where influencers and creators showcase the latest must-haves all while you shop in real time. And for those who love some celeb gossip, reality stars like Kyle Richards, Lala Kent, and friend of the pod, Paige DeSorbo. On her new show, In Bed with Paige DeSorbo, Paige invites top-tier guests to cozy up in her fluffy bed where they spill secrets, share nighttime routines, and even whip up midnight snacks. Stream and shop new episodes of her series In Bed with Paige DeSorbo every Tuesday at 7 p.m. ET by going to amazon.com/live/Paige_DeSorbo. Or you can watch Amazon Live's new live TV channel on Freevee or Prime Video under the DIY section and shop along on your phone.
Super real.
Hey, I'm Julian Morgans, and you're listening to What It Was Like, the show that asks people who have lived through big, dramatic events what it was like. So I want to boast about something for a minute, and it's this. I think that I'm lucky, okay? And I know that's got a little tinge of arrogance about it, but hey, I'm going to stand by it. I think I'm just lucky. I think I'm often the person who wins the raffle, or I find things. The other day I just found a pair of real Ray-Bans just sitting in the garden bed. I just feel like in many ways I fall on my feet, lucky things happen. And then, of course, there's all the other stuff that I probably should have mentioned first, like I'm healthy and I grew up in a stable democracy. So yeah, I feel lucky and I feel very grateful. But on the flip side, I don't really believe in bad luck. Like when I hear someone complaining about their bad luck, I find it hard to be sympathetic. I kind of think that considering yourself unlucky is like, it's a pretty unsexy, self-sabotaging frame of mind. Like if you tell yourself you're unlucky enough, I truly believe that you'll become a bit of a target for bad luck. And I'm telling you all of this because the other day, my friend told me a story about bad luck. It was about his wife's grandfather. I guess you'd call that a grandfather-in-law, and how this grandfather-in-law experienced so much bad luck that the family actually thinks that it was a curse. Okay, I'll set the scene. Here we go. So in the early 1960s, a man named Marshall Gibson swam out to a shipwreck near Portsea. It's about an hour south of Melbourne. And he prized the portholes off this shipwreck. So they're like circular, like the windows on a ship. And he gave them away to his friends as mementos. And over the next couple of years, 3 of his mates who'd received these portholes, they all died in various accidents. And then this man, Marshall, he died too. He got hit by a truck. And my friend told me that it was all because this guy had stolen these portholes off a cursed shipwreck. And I was like, right. But I also thought, that's intriguing. So today, I'm investigating a curse. But I'm also more just generally exploring superstition. And really, I have to admit, by the end of this investigation, I felt less convinced that bad luck doesn't exist. I started by driving from Melbourne down to the Mornington Peninsula to meet David Gibson. And this is my friend's father-in-law. He's in his 70s, and he's the son of the man who stole the portholes off the shipwreck. And I found David mowing his lawn.
David!
Wouldn't stop.
It wouldn't stop.
Hi.
Hello, mate. How you doing?
Good. You found me, obviously. Come this way.
I found you, yeah.
David's family has lived around Portsea his whole life, and according to him, it was a very fun, outdoorsy place to be a kid.
Swimming and bicycle riding and spearfishing and everything else you'd want to do. And part of that was a great deal of spearfishing. And that's how we came to know the wreck of the Cheviot.
The wreck of the Cheviot. That's really where our story starts. So we're going to jump back in time, back to Melbourne of the 1800s. There are over 6,000 known shipwrecks all along the state of Victoria, all along the coast, in which thousands of people lost their lives. Now, by the late 1800s, they'd built some lighthouses and steamboats had replaced sails, so shipwrecks were less common, but still, accidents occurred. On the night of October 19, 1887, the SS Cheviot departed from Melbourne for Sydney. And this was just like a routine, scheduled journey, Melbourne to Sydney, not complicated, but it was bad weather, big seas, and there was a gale blowing. And as the ship passed through the heads of the bay, the ship's propellers failed. Now, realizing they were in deep shit, the crew immediately tried throwing in anchors and setting up sails, but nothing worked, and the ship was driven by the surf up against the rocky coast. At that point, they launched flares to signal for help, and rescuers arrived, but the weather was terrible and they just couldn't get out there. Now, by dawn, there were people still in the ship. They had been clinging on throughout the night, and as it got light, they managed to string this wire from the coast over to the ship. And using that wire, 24 passengers and crew managed to shimmy across over to the sand, and they were saved. But then, just as this was happening, the ship started to break apart, and a total of 35 people died. And now this strip of coastline, mostly of rocks, cliffs, and sand dunes, it's become known as Cheviot Beach. And now fast forward 70 years, and we arrive in the early 1960s. And David remembers seeing the wreck of the Cheviot as a kid.
We occasionally saw this wreck at low tide, and sometimes it would become radically exposed. You could see the whole spine of the ship.
What did it look like?
Well, it was like you see in books. It was an old timber ship. It was quite small. There wasn't any masts on it or anything, but you could see the outline of the hull. And sometimes the side of the hull was exposed. We imagined as kids that there'd be bodies inside, but of course, 100 years later, there isn't. But there were pieces of crockery and remnants of life on that ship that still existed inside the hulk. And of course, on the side of the hull, there were these portholes.
Portholes. These things are the delivery system for the curse, so I'll just say it again. They're basically the windows in the side of a ship. And on wooden ships like the Cheviot, there were rings, and they're made of brass, and they're embedded in the wood. So when the Cheviot went down and became a wreck, the glass was all gone and the wood rotted away. But these circular portholes still studded the side of the ship. And when the weather was just right, you could go down to Cheviot Beach on a warm day and you could see the wreck beneath the water with its portholes like dark circles.
And my father woke up one morning and he went down and went in and saw the whole wreck exposed like he'd never seen before, and took these, which is illegal, took these portholes and other remnants of the ship, and he gave them to Harold Holt, Lex Davison, Richard Faulkner, Peter Lynch and Peter Gibbs and himself. So that makes 6.
So he took 6 portholes off the boat and distributed them to 5 of his mates.
Yeah.
And he kept one for himself.
He did.
Okay. How did he get these portholes off? With like a crowbar or something?
With a little jemmy. He was a pretty strong man, and it wasn't easy. They had to dive down and hold your breath. And so I think he might have been exhausted after doing that.
And what was his thinking? Was he just like, hey, this is a cool memento?
Well, everybody of that group were fascinated by this wreck. I mean, there was a lot of whiskey bottles washed up on the shore. We'd occasionally find remnants of stuff, crockery, etc., in the sand on the beach. And the legend of the Cheviot and other wrecks was very prominent. So they had their eyes on this particular wreck, because it was in this little bay and because at the time it obviously became visible to them, So it obviously became a bit of a thing.
Okay. And how were these gifts received? Was everyone like, oh, cool?
Very excited, yeah. And one or two of them were cleaned up and restored, and the others were just sort of hung up, pried in place, encrusted with all the years of sea growth on them.
Okay, so we've now got 6 families along the Mornington Peninsula with 6 barnacle-encrusted portholes displayed proudly throughout their homes. And I just want to point out, this all happened around Portsea in the 60s. And Portsea has always been a holiday destination for the Melbourne elite. So imagine these cigarette-smoking dads who all knew each other from the war, and these beehive hairdo moms who'd play tennis together, and they'd meet up on weekends for barbecues and Manhattans, and the kids would have sleepovers in backyard tents, and it's this beautiful slice of rich Australiana. And then, very unexpectedly, a shadow falls over the town. And it starts one day on the 20th of February, 1966, at the Sandown track. The Sandown track was and still is a motor racing circuit, about an hour from Portsea. And Lex Davidson was a keen race car driver. He was driving a Repco Brabham, and he failed to take a corner, and the car crashed and he was killed. A newspaper that I found online from the time highlighted how Lex was a very experienced driver, and the crash was inexplicable. And David was there that day, and he sort of remembers it.
Being a young child, we were just told there'd been an accident. They say now that he probably suffered a heart attack at the wheel, but in those days the forensic science wasn't so keen.
So that was tragedy number 1. Lex was buried, and as David remembers, everyone went back to their lives. But the following year, another tragedy struck, and this time it made national news. Now, I haven't really highlighted this, but one of the friends in the circle, one of the guys who received a porthole, was none other than the Prime Minister of Australia. Remember how I said that this enclave was part of the rich jet-set crowd? Well, their friend was Prime Minister Harold Holt. And on December 17, 1967, Harold headed down to Cheviot Beach for a swim. He was with 4 friends, but the water was rough, and only one joined him in the water. But apparently Harold swam out into deeper waters and got stuck in a rip. And later, one of the friends who stayed on the shore described Harold's disappearance as so quick and final, like a leaf being taken away. A massive search followed with helicopters and planes, but no trace of Holt was ever found. By nightfall on December 18th, 1967, his term as Prime Minister was officially ended, and he was declared presumably drowned. David was 18 at the time, and he remembers both Harold Holt and his disappearance.
He was this gentleman that we had to pay respect to, Mr. Holt, and we got into trouble if we called him Harold, but we did anyway. And he was an avuncular sort of guy. And let me describe the beach for you in the day. It was a terrible day in terms of weather. There was that southerly gale, southwesterly wind. So these waves come in, and as the tide comes in and the height of the waves increase, the waves are perhaps a foot higher than the reef. So if you can imagine, you've got a couple of thousand cubic metres of water trying to go down this plug hole and out this channel. And I think that's what happened to Harold.
If you're into conspiracy theories, you'll know that Harold Holt's disappearance has attracted quite a few. There was a book published in the 1980s claiming that he was actually a communist spy for the Chinese and he'd faked his own death and been picked up in a submarine. Another, slightly less bonkers version is that he was accidentally killed in a botched kidnapping. But to David, these are all nonsense.
So you reckon he just got sucked out?
I do, yeah.
He does, however, believe that right up until his death, Harold had kept his porthole on display in his house right above the mantelpiece. And it was about this time, after Harold had disappeared, in the early months of 1968, that a newspaper journalist first suggested that there might be something up with these portholes. I actually found an old newspaper on the internet. It's the Sunday Mail with an article that's headlined "The Curse of the Cheviot," and it's got this quote attributed to Marshall Gibson. And keep in mind that Marshall is David's dad, the man I've been speaking to in this interview. And some journalist went up to Marshall and was like, "Hey, what's up with all these cursed portholes?" And here is what Marshall Gibson is quoted as saying in the newspaper. He goes, "I'm not superstitious. I know there's supposed to be a jinx on these portholes, but I'm not worried." And then, just a few weeks after giving that quote, Marshall was in the Melbourne suburb of Windsor. He stepped off a footpath to cross St Kilda Road, and he was hit by a truck. He died at the scene, making it 3 deaths in 3 calendar years. Half of the group who owned portholes were now dead. I asked David about his father's death, but he didn't seem to want to go into it. He was 19 years old at the time, just out of school, and I imagine that it was a pretty painful period. But in any case, this isn't a story about Marshall Gibson. It's about this strange run of deaths that kept on going. And up next was another member of the friendship circle, Richard Faulkner. I couldn't find an exact date on Richard's death, but here's David's explanation of what happened.
Richard Faulkner had a house down here in Franklin Road, and he was in the car business, and he had a crash on the new Portsea Freeway. And at the time, there was no median strip, there was no trees, there was no barriers, and I think that had a temporary wire fence, which sort of caught him as he either fell asleep or ran off the road. So he died a tragic death there.
So now, that's 4 deaths. That's the majority of the friendship circle within a decade. And that seems to be where it ended. The last 2 remaining men, Peter Gibbons and Peter Lynch, they survived, and they enjoyed life to a ripe old age. And to David, this underscores his belief that the portholes weren't cursed, and really it was just all a big story.
Me, I'm a maths and science student. I'm a bit reductive, not superstitious. I don't give it any credence. We love likely stories, especially if you want to sell newspapers or podcasts. You're going to cut that bit out if you like.
He's right. It's a good kind of story if you want to sell podcasts, except that, as I said at the top, this is not about a curse. It's kind of about a curse, but it's also about exploring superstition. And that's because basically I can't prove whether or not the curse is real. And I know you'd love me to definitively prove if the curse was real. I'd love to do that too, but I can't. But I will tell you something. I'm not religious. I believe in luck, like I said, but I don't have much time for ghosts or even really star signs. I'm kind of a party pooper in most ways, except would I touch that porthole? Absolutely not. No way. Because even though I'm not into superstition, I am into hedging my bets. And I wouldn't want to touch a potentially cursed porthole, even if I'm like 99.9999999% sure that curses aren't real. I just don't see the point. I don't need bad luck. Even if I don't believe in bad luck, I don't need it. And I think what's interesting is that David's kids feel the same way. We're just going to take a quick ad break, but stick with us because when you come back, I'm going to speak to David's daughter. She's also got some interesting stories of her own.
The new Boost Mobile network is offering unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month for life.
That sounds like a threat.
Then how do you think we should say it?
Unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month for the rest of your life?
I don't know.
Until your ultimate demise.
What if we just say forever?
Okay.
$25 a month, forever.
Get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile forever.
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Hey, true crime fans. Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
When you use SAP Concur Solutions to automate your business finances, you'll be ready for anything. Except when your train to work is also headed to the comic convention with the mighty Zorg on board, who happened to bump into his arch nemesis? With SAP Concur, you can be ready for almost anything. Take control of your business finances today at Concur.com.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Okay, welcome back. As you'd recall, I was just talking to David, and now I'm going to go and talk to David's daughter about the portholes and her memories of them as a kid.
I remember finding it. We lived in this home that had a study, and in the study there was hundreds of things, obviously including a lot of books, and wrapped up in some old newspaper was this pothole that we're talking about.
This is Charlotte Gibson. She's in her 30s, but she remembers that when her parents got divorced, her mum actually kept the porthole, which she then found one day wrapped in newspaper, tucked away in a box.
And I remember I went and asked my mum, and she told me her recollection of the story, and I was so fascinated by it that I took it into my room and had it in my room for quite a little while after that.
Did you, and when you're a kid, I mean, it's got this story attached to it, and the story is fairly dark, a bit macabre. I'd have been a little nervous touching it. Did you ever have any of that?
Well, I definitely did touch it. And when I think about it, I remember, feeling nervous that there was a curse. But I think I spoke myself into the curse being related to actually taking it from its an original ship. I think I felt that was what had been, what had sort of had that negative, very negative curse upon it, was actually removing it from its home and from its original ship.
So to you, the curse is actually about like the porthole wants to go home, be with its family. It's not just like...
it shouldn't have been removed from, where it had been sitting for all its life.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's your take on it, on this story? Are you a woman of science or do you err on the side of, I don't know, anything's possible?
Definitely, I love science, but I certainly don't believe in coincidence. And I feel like in this case, it's too much of a coincidence for it to be not something more deeper and more supernatural about it. But I think there's something about potentially not the object itself, but where all these men were at in their lives and these adventures that they were taking, and like this particular adventure that they took, and they took these objects and left.
I think at this point, Charlotte was getting at something that I agree with. I said at the start that I believe in luck, but when I really think about it, like what luck is, I think that luck is a very small word to describe the complexity of life. Now, bear with me. I know that's a lofty sentence, but just to drill into Charlotte's point for a moment, you could say that these four men, they all experienced extremely bad luck. One drowned, one got hit by a truck, 2 died in crashes, so all round, very bad luck. But seen another way, all of these men were into high-octane adventures. We know at least one of them was into car racing, and David actually said that his dad was into car racing too. And it seems that they're all into skin diving, down to shipwrecks. And then there was Harold Holt, who was apparently into swimming in water that his mates thought was too dangerous. So my point is that this was a collection of friends for whom high-risk activities were the norm. They were a hobby. And statistically, maybe this group of friends was more likely to die young. And so maybe seen through that lens, this porthole thing, it just becomes like a bit of a red herring. The portholes, in this light, they become a correlation, but they're definitely not causation. And so I think that when we're using words like luck or cursed, what we're really doing is lumping a whole range of messy variables under a headline. And yet, still, even with that in mind, I have to admit, I wouldn't touch those portholes. So I asked Charlotte if she would.
Yeah, and I would touch it, yeah. Only because I had this experience with it when I was younger, and I'm still around to tell the story.
At this point in the conversation, Charlotte and I got onto the topic of what had happened to the portholes. For the most part, David told me that they'd been passed on to various family members and friends throughout the group. But Charlotte didn't actually know what had happened to their porthole. But here's the thing, because I did. I had been texting some members of this family through my friend, and what I'd found out is that actually Charlotte's mum had kept it for years and years, until one day her husband at the time, a guy named Mick, remember David and Charlotte's mum, they divorced, so this new guy came on the scene. His name was Mick, and he picked up the porthole one afternoon to have a look at it, and a week later he was diagnosed with cancer. And at this point, Charlotte's mum got kind of a little freaked out, and she gave the porthole back to David, who has kept it in storage ever since. So I told Charlotte all of this, and she was surprised, because it was the first time that she'd found out what had happened to the porthole since she was a kid.
Oh, really? That's interesting, because that's what I was saying when we went to move or something. I couldn't find it. It wasn't there anymore. Just when I think back to that house, in the same study that the porthole was in, Mum had this huge picture of Mick, who was her husband that passed away. And it had been up there for years, I think 5 years or something. And he actually passed away in that house too. And it was the morning of the auction, and there was this huge crash down off the wall, and we all were like, what is that? And we went into the study, and his huge big painting, a picture, had fallen off the wall and crashed. And I remember that so vividly, because I remember that we all thought it was some sort of sign from him that he was there or something like that at the time that we were selling the house that day. But now that we're talking about it, it does seem like maybe I changed my answer about touching it now that we're talking about it. And I heard that Mum gave it away after that bad luck. You know, there are all these males. I certainly wouldn't let my husband touch it.
Are you serious about that?
I think so, yeah. I think after sort of just discovering that Mum gave it away and that talking about Mick and that happening shortly after, I think maybe I would definitely think twice about getting a male father figure to touch it.
Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of dead father figures in this story.
And that's kind of where I land too. I'm sure that this is a story about the ways that us humans try to make sense of randomness. But I also just don't want to get cursed. I just don't need that in my life. After talking with David and Charlotte, I drove the rest of the way down the Mornington Peninsula, down to Cheviot Beach. And I looked over the cliffs, into this cauldron of rocks and surf and green ocean. And I couldn't see the wreck of the Cheviot, but I just looked at the water, and I thought about a ship full of people going down in the dark. And I thought about Harold Holt getting sucked out in a rip. And I thought about this little friendship circle of men. These men who had gone to school together down on the peninsula, and they'd gone off to war together, and they'd come back and married their sweethearts, and they'd had big, interesting lives, just as big and interesting and seemingly important as my own life, except that they'd all died in accidents in the 1960s, and now, in some ways, they're barely remembered. And I thought about how often life is just kind of a hot mess, that a ship can depart a port according to a timetable, and everyone on board could be like, yep, this is routine, this will be fine. And then a few hours later, most of them are dead. And I hate that we have so little control over when we die in accidents or when we drown or if we get cancer. I hate the lack of control over my own life. And I think, really, at its core, that's why I don't want to believe in curses, because I want to believe I'm in control. And also, I think that's probably why I believe that I'm lucky. Because if I believe that I'm lucky, then I will be more lucky, and that somehow affords me more control. So no, look, I wouldn't touch a porthole, but I also wouldn't dive down to that wreck below me in this washing machine of a beach. Because frankly, life just feels delicate enough as it is, and I'm just so happy with every illusion of control that I can get. Today's episode was produced by Rachel Tuffrey. It was mixed by Jimmy Saunders, who also did our theme music. Daniela Cantu and Darcy Humphreys are our interns. Our cover art is by Naomi Lee Beveridge, and this whole thing has been a Super Real production.
When you use SAP Concur Solutions to automate your business finances, you'll be ready for anything. Except when your train to work is also headed to the comic convention with the mighty Zorg on board, who happened to bump into his arch nemesis. With SAP Concur, you can be ready for almost anything. Take control of your business finances today at Concur.com.
Balancing a wellness routine and busy travel plans? Try Allo Moves, the health and wellness app you need to stay consistent. Allo Moves goes with you and offers yoga, Pilates, strength workouts, and so much more. From 5 minutes to 60-minute classes, Allo Moves has a class or flow that fits your schedule. There's also meditations, sound baths, nutrition tips, and self-care tutorials to meet your holistic wellness goals on your time. Go to allomoves.com and use the code ACAST to claim your 30-day free trial today.